Lawyers of Reddit, what's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on? And did you? I worked as a receptionist at a small personal injury firm and was the first line of defense against the more outlandish cases. One of the most ridiculous calls I took involved a woman wanting to sue her cat's veterinarian for malpractice because her cat scratched her, which in turn supposedly caused her liver to fail and a slew of other health problems to arise. She believed the vet was at fault because she was convinced the cat was carrying some obscure disease and the vet had failed to catch it. It was my second day on the job, so I put her through to an attorney, not yet knowing what else to do with such a ridiculous situation. She got a firm sorry, can't help you from our office, in part because we did not do malpractice, veterinary or otherwise, but also because she sounded like a one-way ticket to crazy town. Some might point out, the woman may have actually had cat scratch fever, which could in theory lead to a legitimate claim. However, when she called, she presented it as I got sick, and then someone told me it was from my cat. My vet never told me my cat was sick. Can I sue him for malpractice? And apparently vets do not regularly test for cat scratch fever unless you bring your cat in for certain symptoms. This was clearly an I see a chance for a cash payout situation. And we would get calls like that all the time with both bizarre and banal stories behind them. Either way, she would have needed someone more specialized than the firm I worked for, which primarily handled car accidents and zero cats. A good secretary receptionist who knows how to keep the crazies out of your office is worth their weight in gold to attorneys. When one of the older partners in my office retired, there was basically a bidding war for his secretary among the younger partners who didn't have an experienced secretary. I am a personal injury lawyer in the UK. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority as her home was owned by the council and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Honestly, if she could pay up front, I know plenty of plaintiff's side attorneys who would take that. Her money's as good as anyone else's. If she wants it on contingency, then frick that. I'm in immigration, so most of my stupid cases involve people trying to con the system or forgot to tell us material information. One lady stood out, though. She was referred to as a pro bono case. She was filing for asylum based on the fact that she's a Chinese national and she's also a devout Christian. If she was sent back, she would be persecuted based on religious reasons. So nothing weird up to this point. She provided me with statements about how she and her family were harassed by the local police and how certain members of her congregation were arrested. So I'm looking at the statements and the names and places sound familiar. Sure enough, a quick googling showed this was one of the bought stories. Essentially what happens is there are people on the internet that sells these packages of fake documents and stories for a successful asylum case. From what I've heard, it usually is a real case that was successful, and someone got a hold of the supporting documents and started mass producing them and selling them. I'm guessing you're supposed to change the names from the original, but this lady didn't. Another red flag was the fact that in her supporting documents, the witnesses kept referring to her in the male form. At first I thought the English translation had typos, but yeah, same thing in the original Chinese ones. I always thought it was more of an urban legend amongst immigration lawyers. Needless to say, I did not take her case. This is an episode of West Wing 2. The staff wasn't sure if the Chinese nationals were really Christians or if they were just trying to get into the US. President Bartlett spoke to the pastor as a shibboleth. I never did much criminal defense, but a man, who we'll call Dennis, came into my office with a driving while intoxicated charge and an aggravated unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle charge, both misdemeanors. Dennis swore up, down, and sideways that 1. He does not drink and was not intoxicated. 2. He never drove the vehicle. And 3. That he has a valid driver's license. I give Dennis the names of some local criminal defense and DWI attorneys and suggest he try them out. Dennis refuses, saying I'm the lawyer he wants. In hindsight, I should have realized that he probably had already gone to these other attorneys and only came to me after they refused to take his case. I charge the guy $200 for an intake and record review fee and contact the local court, police station, and district attorney's office for information and paperwork. I find out that not only did this guy blow a .18 on the breathalyzer, but the cops did the blood test on him after he kept insisting he wasn't drunk. The blood test came back with a .22 back. As for driving, the separate squad cars witnessed Dennis's vehicle run over a mailbox and drive off. He was followed and pulled over on the block. But the police report, Dennis was the only person in the car and was in the driver's seat with a seatbelt on. Oh, and I tracked down his license through the DMV and it had expired 3 years ago and was suspended for 2 years prior to that. I called Dennis back into my office and told him he did not have a case that should be taken to trial. Dennis admitted that he probably had been drunk, but he wasn't aware he had been drinking. His son must have put Fireball whiskey in his green tea and he didn't realize there was whiskey in his green tea because he was eating red hot cinnamon candies and had a cold stuffy nose. Anyways, Dennis retains me, but only after I put a clause in his engagement agreement stating I explained his low chance at trial and he understood there was no guarantee of a win. I take the case to trial and, of course, we lose. I was hoping to convince Dennis to take one of the plea offers given to us in advance, but absolutely not. Dennis was sure the judge would understand. Dennis wanted a bench trial, not a jury trial. I made him sign another document later on that said he understood the difference between a bench and jury trial and he was opting for the bench trial, and he would be found not guilty and everyone would move on. He was sorely disappointed, but only got probation after trial. I think the judge was taking pity on me more than Dennis. Dennis later sued me for his retainer because I didn't adequately defend him. As proof of my inadequate representation, he offered the judge's verdict rendering him guilty. The case was thrown out quickly. Dennis is the dictionary definition of doubling down. I didn't expect that sentence to alliterate that much. I was called by a gentleman, I use the term loosely here, who wanted me to get his son-in-law out of jail from a drug possession charge. Before I could respond he starts spilling the story. Police were called to the mobile home park for a domestic disturbance between the man and his wife. Call said he was beating the heck out of her in the front yard for the whole neighborhood to see, and they had better hurry. When they arrive on site, the man has calmed down and is sitting in his truck smoking a cigarette, and the woman was bloody, couple of broken bones, if I remember correctly, but was screaming from the front porch and throwing his personal items out the front door, as his regular habit. First thing the police do is ask if there are any firearms around they need to worry about since she has gone back inside. The man says, no, his pistol should be in the box on the back seat. Police ask him if they can open the box to verify it was there. He says sure. When they did, they find no gun, but lots of drugs. He says oh right, gun's under the passenger seat. Police retrieve the gun and take him into custody for the drugs. What makes this the stupidest case is that I got my call from the man's father-in-law who wanted to hire me to go get the guy out of jail and defend him on the charges. I thought a minute about the parties, then asked, if he is your son-in-law, then wouldn't your daughter be the woman who he was beating? He said yay, but he is probably the best she is going to do for herself. I did not take the case because I am a patent lawyer. I don't practice criminal or family law, and definitely do not want to. Sometimes you have no choice but to take it. I represented a guy who sold and leased cars. A woman worked for a company that let her drive a company van to work as part of a carpool effort. She'd keep the van at home and picked up fellow workers to go to work, then bring them back to their homes. One day going to work, she was stopped at a stoplight. Some guy didn't stop in time and bumped into the van. She got out to look. She and the other guy agreed no damage, so each went on her way. Later, a woman who was a passenger discovered she was injured, went to a lawyer. The lawyer sued the company, the driver, and every passenger in the van. The lawyer deposed each passenger, got the name of their auto insurance company, sent a demand letter for coverage. One of the passengers said, I don't have a car, but my sister does, so they sued the sister. She said, I don't have insurance because I'll lease the car, and they provide insurance, so the lawyer sued my client and sent a demand letter for insurance coverage. Worked as IT for a family law firm. One day a lady comes in asking to have an attorney look at her divorce. She goes in with the lawyer and tells him she wants the divorce on the grounds that he was beating her. The attorney explained that he would be willing to do it, but advised that because the marriage was so short, just a few months, the easiest way to get a divorce and get away from her abuser was just to file a no fault and get it over with. She starts yelling, throwing things at, and hitting him. Mind you, he is an older guy in his late 60s at this point, telling him that if she could get 4 other divorces from him then she could do it a 5th. She had married and divorced the same guy 4 times before this. The firm didn't take the case, but our sister firm, what we called the firm our firm split off of, did take on the guy's case. Turns out she had actually been the abusive one, basically holding him and their kids hostage with threats of telling the police he was molesting the kids and beating her. Honestly, the part about this that shocks me the most is that the guy wasn't confident enough that the court would acquit him even though he didn't do anything. Let me preface this, I had heard about the guy I'm going to mention below before I had actually met him. I thought this was an urban legend, until he came into my office one day. A guy in his late 50s early 60s comes into the lobby area of my office and starts a commotion that freaks out the receptionist. I was the closest attorney to the lobby, so I go out and talk to the guy. He was clearly mentally disturbed and presented the following story. Someone had implanted a device in his brain that was controlling his behavior. He believed it was being controlled by Baskin-Robbins and a former mayor of Detroit. He believed they were forcing him to do random things like going to bars to drink, taking the wrong turn when driving, forcing him to retire from his job, and a lot of very other intricate things. After asking him if he had seen any doctors regarding the implant, he got really upset and said that he thought the doctors were in on it as well. After telling him I couldn't help him and suggesting that he find some new doctors, he asked me if I knew any lawyers who specialized in his kind of case. I often wonder if the lawyer I referred him to was able to help him. Not a lawyer, but worked for a large national insurer who dealt with frivolous lawsuits frequently. Idiot is visiting friends in the country and gets drunk. Decides to wander across the street to the driveway of a farm. Ignores the multiple signs that say no trespassing and beware dog in both English and Spanish. Gets to the end of the driveway and there's a large dog chained to a post in the front yard barking its head off at him. Farmer comes out and tells the idiot to stay away from the dog. Idiot says something to the effect that he's good with dogs and tries to pet the dog. Dog takes off his finger and the idiot drops his beer bottle as he runs back the way he came. Owner tries to save the finger for reattachment, but the guy disappears, and so the farmer turns everything over to the police. Shortly thereafter we denied the idiot's claim and he lawyers up. Every time he lawyered up we'd send the documents to the lawyer. Lawyer would review and then drop the case. Happened multiple times. Idiot insisted we needed to pay for his emotional trauma. SMH. I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident pie claim. He had written a poem, in Yoruba, about the accident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing, in Yoruba. Among other problems, I can't speak any fricking Yoruba, as in, not one word, as in, that day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language, and I am really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to get on with it so we can talk about his claim. He does. It takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I'll take his case on now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem, in Yoruba, is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to frick off and stop wasting my time. He does, but not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so, reading out his poem, to no one in particular, over and over again, in Yoruba. I was driving my car one day, when a motorbike got in my way. He didn't halt, so it wasn't my fault. Ilagba yiayu sanwo fung bogboa. A master's student was repeatedly attacked by his neighbor's dog, Pit Bull. The third time it attacked him, he had to get 6 stitches. He called the cops and they told him to call animal control. He called animal control and they told him they could only hold the dog for 12 days. Then they have to give it back. So, the fourth time it attacked him, he broke its teeth and ribs, then dragged the dog to the neighbor's house, opened the door and threw it inside. Very stupid on his part. When the cops arrived, the dog's owner and her roommate accused him of attacking the dog for some stupid reason. He spent one night in jail for criminal mischief, a Class C misdemeanor. Since he had police reports, animal control reports, pictures of his injuries, and hospital bills, his case was strong and we decided to take it. However, the neuter, in an attempt to further her career, tried to bump his case up to a felony. The judge threw the case out immediately and gave the guy an expunction. These attacks happened over the span of several months. The guy just wanted to forgive and forget until he had to get stitches. He broke the dog's teeth and ribs with his bare fists. The felony was for breaking and entering. After law school, I took a job in a little law office in a very rural town. One day, a cousin of one of the partners comes riding up on his bike. The partner said he didn't want to deal with it, so he told me to handle his cousin. The cousin reaches into his jacket and pulls out a Ziploc bag with a slice of bologna inside. The bologna has a piece of metal in it, probably something that fell in during processing. He thinks he has a multi-million-dollar product defect case and wants us to sue. Alright. Did you eat a piece of bologna with metal in it and were harmed? No. I saw the metal before I ate it. Was anyone else harmed? No. We passed it around and looked at it. If you aren't harmed by a slice of defective bologna, and, to be fair, this was a defective slice of bologna, then your damages are going to be limited to your costs. I told him that I could probably get him a free pack of bologna, and that was about it. He was really disappointed and he left the slice of bologna at the office. I told him that I'd have his cousin, the partner, take a look at it. Then he left. I took the slice of bologna back to the partner's office and he nearly peed himself laughing when I told him the story. The secretaries came in to see what was up and everyone just lost it. That was a fun day. The slice of bologna went into the freezer at the firm and, as far as I know, it's still there. I hand out a lot of business cards, so they inevitably end up in the hands of some questionable people. Eventually they found their way into the hands of Mr. Bob. That's obviously not his real name. Mr. Bob was a very unique fellow. He approached me inquiring about suing the federal government, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, the entirety of Congress, and the President. This obviously put me on guard due to the ridiculousness of his request, but instead of throwing him out the door, I decided to ask why he wanted to sue the aforementioned parties. He replied that the government had kidnapped him and performed all sorts of painful experiments on him. He claimed that the government was working with the reptilians to pursue some generic evil plot against humanity as a whole. He claimed that the only reason he managed to escape was that there was a reptilian double agent who managed to spring him from his cell, and after laying low for a few years he came to me for help. At that point I was done with this conversation. I asked him to wait out in the lobby while I called the local police department to make sure this guy hadn't escaped from prison or some insane asylum. He hadn't. After I got off the phone, I went back over to Mr. Bill and told him that if the government officials were working under the reptilians, then that meant they would have revoked their American citizenship and thus were only subject to intergalactic law. Since I only specialize in the American law practice, I couldn't help him. He seemed really disappointed, but he left without making any fuss. Yeah, that was both the best and worst day of my career. Makes for an interesting story at parties though. Mr. Bob, Mr. Bill, looks like your story doesn't quite add up. Reptilian scum. Not a lawyer but someone tried to drag my state office into their legal battle. I work for a state historic preservation office. A guy sent me a letter that he has artifacts coming out of his garden and wanted to preserve his property. He also went on about the local endangered butterfly species that allegedly lives in his yard. I thanked him for the info, told him we'd register the archaeological sites in our inventory, which would have no meaningful impact on anything as we already had numerous sites in the area from a housing development project that surrounds his property. Full stop. Anyway, I told him he could put a restrictive deed covenant on his property so if anyone ever wanted to build there they'd have to talk to my office first. This is a standard sort of deed thing we do. Months go by and I get another letter. Instead of doing what I suggested, he tried to give us a historic easement on his property. We don't do that. That's not a thing. We don't want it. Turns out that the city he lives in has an eminent domain case against him. When you look at Google Street View you can see the sidewalks on either side of his property that skip his yard. It became apparent that he was trying to use us to aid his fight against the installation of sidewalks on his property. Yeah, he wanted the state to step in to help him with this. My boss wrote him a letter basically telling him to pound salt. I spent 4 years giving pro bono legal advice at a law center for people who couldn't afford a lawyer, during which time I had a lot of crazy cases. Kids wanting to sue the police for confiscating their drugs, you name it. One that sticks in my mind is a middle-aged lady who wanted to sue a scaffolding company because they had erected scaffolding beside her property while working on the house next door, and she claimed this had enabled a burglar to enter her property and steal a large number of valuable items from her bedroom. Okay, I'm not really sure about the cause of action, but I ask her what was stolen. Without batting an eyelid she regales a list of property including a collection of Gucci handbags, designer pens and sunglasses, etc., coming to a total of over £50,000. I raise an eyebrow because I'm a finance lawyer and I couldn't afford that kind of stuff. Also, this is a pro bono law center for people who can't afford a lawyer. I ask her what she does for a living and she tells me she's been unemployed for the last 18 years and has been living on benefits in a council flat for that whole time. I ask her if she has receipts for the property which was stolen. Nope. What about bank statements? Or even photographs of her with the items? Nope. She claims they were all presents from a friend. I ask her if maybe she could ask the friend for evidence of the purchases. Nope. Mysterious benefactor friend has conveniently just died. She doesn't seem very upset. I change tack and ask how she knows the burglar entered her bedroom through the window. She says that he can't have entered through the door because she has 3 heavy-duty locks on the door. I ask her why. She explains that her son is a drug dealer and convicted burglar and he and his friends are always stealing from her. Awesome. I calmly explain to her that the law center only assists with small claims which at the time were capped at £5,000. Without a pause she says in that case she'll just claim the £5,000. Of course. I then explained that, even assuming we could identify a cause of action against the scaffolder, she would have to satisfy the court that she had owned the property stolen, and the lack of evidence would make this difficult. Quite aside from the whole convicted burglar son point. On that basis, we can't take on the case because we have limited resources and have to allocate them to the strongest claims. Woman starts screaming at me that I'm slandering her by calling her a liar and that I'm a xenophobic, chauvinistic pig, that she's going to sue me and report me to the police, have her son burgle my house, etc. I just sit there ignoring her. Eventually she realizes that she's getting nowhere and leaves. I close her file and add her to the list of people who are never to be given an appointment again. Justice is done. The first firm I worked at was in my hometown outside of Chicago. There was an existing client who I was warned about as being from Spain and very eccentric. That is, rich and crazy. They handed me a letter from the US Patent and Trademark Office refusing to register our client's trademark and told me to prepare a response. Upon review of the file, the client was attempting to name the son and trademark that name so he could collect royalties from all the governments of the world for the mere price of 6% of their GDP. Now, you may say, isn't that unfair to developing countries? Yes, our client anticipated this response and, from the bottom of his heart, exempted such developing countries as he chose from this royalty fee. I refused to submit the response to the USPTO. A few months later, the law firm folded because one of the partners deposited a forged cashier's check into our client trust account, containing about 50 or so different clients' property, and immediately wired the cash to Japan. Once the bank discovered the forgery, it withdrew all the funds in our client trust account, leaving it overdrawn. Lawyers will profoundly understand the ethical implications of this problem. I left shortly thereafter. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.